Hi everyone, I'm delighted to be talking to you all today. My name is Dr. George Bailey. I'm a lecturer at the University of York in social linguistics. And I'm going to give this linguistics mini lecture for the next 20 minutes or so, just to give you a taste of what it can be like to study in the department and some of the topics that you might cover. So I actually teach and conduct research in two areas. So one is social linguistics, and the other is phonetics and phonology. So you may be familiar with these terms already if you've taken English language at A level, but I will go over them just briefly. So social linguistics, as the name suggests really, is concerned with the social aspects of language use. So we're interested in things like variation and change in how language is used across society, how and why we all talk differently, even when we speak the same language, and how that variation is really systematic. So it patterns with things like socio-demographic factors, age, gender, ethnicity, social class, region. All of these things are relevant for how we speak. And it's also interested in how language is quite a fundamental part of our identity. So, how we kind of construct a persona of ourselves. And we do that through language. Now, phonetics and phonology, on the other hand, this is specifically the study of the sounds of human language. So, the phonetics part is interested in the physical properties of speech. So, it's things like the anatomy of the vocal tract, how we actually articulate different sounds. Whereas the phonology part is more about how those sounds behave in context. So, what happens when we put different sounds together to form words, to construct meaning, and certain sounds may change depending on where they occur and how they're used. So, there is naturally quite a lot of overlap between those two fields because, social linguistics is interested in variation and change, and the sounds of language often vary and change. I will be talking about some of that later on. But I want to just start off with a question, which is really to illustrate quite an important point in phonetics, and that's that we're dealing with sounds and not letters. So think about this question for a second. How many vowels are there in English? And I'll give you a clue. It's not five. It's not just A, E, I, O, and U. So have a think about that. The answer, well, it depends on the dialect. So there's no one right answer, but in certain dialects there's up to 25 vowels. And in pretty much any dialect of English, there's probably not fewer than 20. So there's quite a lot. This is what they look like. So these symbols probably won't be familiar with you. You may have seen them some in your English language A level if you've taken that, but these are the symbols, the phonetic symbols from the International Phonetic Alphabet. And you can see the full chart here. So really, this is the set of symbols that we use as phoneticians to transcribe and represent all of the sounds of language. So in theory, at least, all of the symbols here represent every sound that's been attested in any human language. And what's cool is that, the different languages will use the chart in different ways. So no one language uses all of these sounds. They kind of pick and choose what sounds to use in the language. And some languages use more than others. So you have languages like Hawaiian, which only has 8 consonants, which really isn't a lot. Then you've got languages like Kung, which is spoken in Namibia, which has 96 consonants. So a huge kind of range there. English is somewhere in between. If we zoom in and just look at the vowels for a second, I'm going to just focus on the ones that are used in English, so we'll take a little tour of them. It's not always obvious what sound each symbol represents. So this is the vowel E, as in the word fleece. This is the symbol for the I vowel, as in kit. This is the E, as in dress. This is the as in nurse. This is the A, as in trap. And I should say that I'm using these labels deliberately. So when I say trap, this is actually what we call a lexical set. So we refer to it as the trap vowel. So it's not just the trap word, but basically any word like trap, which has that A vowel in it. So we use those kind of terms, those lexical sets, quite a lot in British social linguistics and also in dialectology to refer to these vowels. So this symbol, moving towards the back now, is the R as in palm, the O as in cot, the O as in thought, the O as in foot, and the oo as in goose. I realise that is a duck, but there is no goose emoji. Okay, so you might be thinking at this point, why is the vowel chart organised in that way? So why is it that we have, the E symbol, which is all the way up here, and the or symbol on the kind of opposite end, at the bottom right of that vowel chart? Well, what's cool is that this layout, it actually represents how we articulate the sounds. So there's a whole field of articulatory phonetics where the approach is to use instrumental methods to directly study how we articulate sounds. So we can see this here. This is an MRI scan of someone's head. And it's what we call a mid-sagittal view, like a 2D cross-section. And you can see some obvious things. You can see the nose over here. You can see the chin. This is the tongue. It's a huge muscle. And actually, if we zoom in now, it gets a bit blurry, but essentially when we overlay the vowel chart on this cross-section of someone's vocal tract, the positions of each symbol, of each sound, represent the position of the tongue when we make that sound. So the E vowel, the tongue is quite front in the mouth and it's quite high up. So you can see it at the top left here. For the oo vowel, the tongue moves further back, but it is still quite high up. The O vowel, it's at the back, but the tongue lowers. So there is a kind of logic to, how this vowel chart is actually organised. So if we think about how that works then, we might want to ask the question, why is the position of the tongue in the mouth so important for these vowels? And actually we can look to musical instruments for a good analogy for this. So these are all string instruments, different types. You've got guitars, lutes, harps, violins, etc. And they all have quite distinctive qualities to how they sound. But if we think about it, the way they're made, the kind of basic mechanism for how they produce sound is the same. You pluck some kind of string. So why is it that they all sound different? And one reason for that is the differences in what we call the resonating chamber, so the body of the instrument. You can see all the different shapes and sizes here. And speech is the same. So we use our tongue and the other articulators, like the lips, to change the size and the shape of our own vocal tract, our resonating chamber. And when we do that, it modifies the dynamics of airflow quite well. So, airflow being just the way that air flows from the lungs into the mouth or into the nose and out of our body when we talk. The shape of our vocal tract will determine the quality of sound that we make. So I'll show a few more examples of this kind of field of instrumental phonetics and articulatory phonetics. So we saw an MRI scan just earlier. That's only one method though. Another method is the use of X-ray. So this actually involves laying a chain of small lead pellets across the surface of the tongue. And what happens is when you take an X-ray scan of the head, you can actually see those pellets on the scan. So you can see them here. They show up in black, and you've got the red point, which just illustrates the highest point of the tongue. And it illustrates what we saw before. So for the E vowel, the highest point of the tongue is quite high up and quite far forward in the mouth. For oo, it's quite high up but further back. And then for R and O, for R, it's kind of lower down. So using X-ray, we can see what the tongue is doing when we make these vowels, and we can quite clearly see the position of the tongue is very different depending on the vowel that we make. Now, X-ray isn't really used anymore. This picture was from 1917, so it was quite popular very early on, but X-ray radiation isn't good for you, so people don't tend to use it anymore. But it is quite cool. I've got a little video to show you here, which is somebody saying a very unusual sentence of, "Why did Ken set the soggy net on top of his deck?" And you can see all the things that are going on. So you can see the tongue moving quite a lot. You can see this thing at the back of the mouth called the velum, which constantly raises and lowers. So have a look out for this now.
Why did Ken set the soggy net on top of his deck?
So the velum moves all the time. This is the kind of soft, fleshy part of the roof of your mouth towards the back. It's what the uvula hangs down from at the back of your throat. And we constantly raise and lower it in order to block off the nasal passage or to open up the nasal passage. If we want to make a nasal sound like n or m, then you need to lower that velum so air can go into the nose and escape through the nostrils, basically. Now, another more modern technique is ultrasound tongue imaging. So this is much better than X-ray, mainly because it doesn't emit any harmful radiation, which is good. But it kind of works in the same way. It shows us a kind of 2D cross-section of the tongue. It looks like this. This is modelled by me a few years ago. So this scary looking kind of head cage that you have to wear, that's really just to stabilise the ultrasound wand, which is held here underneath the chin. And then how it works is it's quite simple really. The wand just emits a very, very high frequency sound wave, hence why it's called ultrasound. So high frequency that you can't really hear it as humans. But what happens is when those sound waves bounce back off the surface of the tongue, it allows us to actually visualise the shape and the position of the tongue in the mouth. So it looks something like this. It's a bit blurry, but you can see this is the tongue. The tip is over here, and the root of the tongue at the back is over here. And you can see it moving in real time. And what's great with ultrasound is that we can use it for studying really cool things. So one example is what we call covert variation in how the R sounds are articulated. So in other words, what happens is people are producing the same sound, this R sound, but in very different ways. And we didn't really realise this until you collect that kind of articulatory data. You can see what's going on in the mouth. So some people have what we call a bunched tongue shape, and you can see in a diagram here. The tip of the tongue is facing downwards, and the body of the tongue is kind of bunched up high. And it looks like this.
Real. Fries.
So again, don't forget, we're looking at the tongue. Let's just pause it at a good point. The tongue tip here facing down, the body of the tongue bunching up. So quite a kind of characteristic shape of the tongue there. Now other people do something completely different. So other people are what we call retroflexors, where you have the tip of the tongue facing upwards and it actually curls back on itself as well. So again, I'll play you a video, and remember the tongue tip is over here and you'll see it curling back on itself slightly. So again, it's one of those things where make the sound yourself. You might be able to feel what you're actually doing. You know, what is your tongue doing when you make that R sound? Are you a buncher or are you a retroflexor? You should be able to actually feel the difference. Another example of quite cool variation is how we articulate L sounds in English. So another bit of a trick question here. How many L sounds are there? Again, have a think about it. And I'll give you a hint. It's not one. So many dialects actually have 2 L sounds. And again, this is something you can try out yourself. So just say the 2 words that are on the screen now and hold out the L sound. So leaf and feel. And you may have heard the difference when I made the words then, and you would probably do the same thing. This is quite a consistent pattern in most varieties of English. But you should also be able to feel the difference as well. If you hold it out, you should feel like your tongue is doing something quite different for those 2 L's. Same applies for these words, so late versus tail. Now, you might be able to spot the pattern, and you know this is kind of a fundamental part of phonology. It's about looking at data like this and spotting these patterns. So what is it that determines when you get one type of L versus the other? So have a think about it. I mean, you might be able to notice it straight away. You might want to say that, oh, it looks like you get one type of L at the start of the word, another type of L at the end of the word. But it's not quite that simple. Here we have the words taller and alter. And they show that same kind of alternation, but here they're both in the middle of the word. So I won't give you the answer, I'll let you mull that one over, but it's quite a complex pattern in English. And really it's the difference in what we call the light L and the dark L. So L versus L. And we see them both appear in this word little. And again, you can see the difference in this ultrasound video.
Little.
So you can see the tongue is doing something very different for the first L compared to the second L.
Little.
That's the first one. That's the second one. And you see the back of the tongue being raised towards that soft palate, the velum that I mentioned earlier. Okay, one final method that I just want to mention is electromagnetic articulography, or EMA for short. And this has one big advantage over ultrasound, because ultrasound only tracks the position and the movements of the tongue, whereas EMA can track pretty much anything that you can stick a magnet to, because that's how it works. So again, this is a picture of me demoing it a couple of years ago. So what happens here is you can see this machine, and you stick lots of small magnets to the tongue, to the lips, to the chin, the cheeks, wherever you want, basically. And those magnets are then tracked in 3D space by this machine, which emits an electromagnetic field. So it's really kind of cool and high tech. And we've got this equipment at York, so it is open, for staff and students to conduct their own original research projects. And I think it's a really cool example of this articulatory phonetics, where we can see and understand what we're actually doing when we talk. Okay, I want to just finish, as promised, talking a bit about variation and change. So all the different ways in which phonetics can vary between different dialects, and how sounds can be involved in language change over time. So to start off with, just think about this question. Do the words, well, I probably shouldn't say them, I don't want to influence you. So read the words and think about, do they rhyme for you? So for me, I would say gas and glass. So they do rhyme. But I'm guessing for some of you they didn't. So what's going on? Why is it that these words rhyme for some people but not others? Well, it's a well-known dialectal divide in England, but it wasn't always the case. So it's what we call the trap and the bath vowels. So remember, I used one of these labels before, trap. When we say trap or bath, I'm not just talking about those words. They refer to groups of words which behave in the same way. So the trap vowel, this is the vowel in words like trap and bat and mad. And then the bath vowel is the vowel in words like bath and dance and grass. And at an earlier point in the English language, around the 17th century and before, these vowels were pronounced the same. And you might notice they are for me as well. I have the same vowel for all of these words. But then around the 17th century, the language changed, and something happened, what we call the trap-bath split. So what happened was, after this change took place, the bath words began to be pronounced with a long R vowel instead. So it was still trap, bat and mad, but it was now bath, dance and grass. And what's cool is that change only took place in the south of England. So it never happened in the north of England. That's where I'm from, hence why I don't do it. I have the same vowel in these two groups of words. But it leads to this quite strong dialectal divide that we still see today. Here's another example. So again, I won't say the words. Do they rhyme for you, yes or no? For me, foot and cut, they rhyme perfectly. I'm guessing if your answer was yes to the last question, if those words rhymed, these words probably rhyme for you as well. So this is now the foot-strut split, and it's basically a similar thing to what we've just seen. Historically, we had these foot words like foot and should and full, and we had these strut words like strut and bus and cut. But then in the middle of the 17th century, this split took place. And that group of words, the strut group, began to be pronounced like strat and bass and cat instead. But it only took place in the south of England. So again, for me, these vowels are all the same. So you can see the regional pattern that I just mentioned in these dialect maps. So this is based on recent data, part of a research project that I've been involved in for quite a few years now, where we map dialectal variation across the UK. You can click the links to the maps there if you want to explore them yourself. And what's cool is that you can see, so the green dots here, these are people who say foot and strut. These are people who say foot but strat instead with a different vowel. And here the red dots are people who say trap and bath. And here the green dots are people who say trap but they have bath instead, the different vowel. And you can see the kind of, if you draw a dividing line, it's roughly in the same place, which is quite cool. I should note actually that as part of this project, we compared these modern dialect maps to ones from the 1950s, and it does look like some of these boundaries have moved northwards. So that southern pronunciation of strat, bass and cat is kind of creeping northwards over time. Okay, I just want to finish off now by saying what I love about phonetics and phonology, which is mainly that it interacts with so many different other elements of linguistics. So we can study things like sound change, so how languages and sounds change over time. We can use phonetics in language documentation, so transcribing endangered languages to preserve them, to help create materials to kind of revitalise those languages that are maybe on the verge of extinction. And this kind of knowledge of phonetics and phonology and accents definitely is really important when it comes to studying language attitudes, especially accent discrimination. We know this is still a really pervasive issue in society even today. And it also has quite applied uses, so there's an entire field of forensic phonetics which is used in police work, and our department at York is a real kind of leader in this field. And also a good grounding in phonetics is crucial for a lot of modern technology, so these innovations like automatic speech recognition, so these ASR systems, things like Amazon Alexa and Siri, these really rely on a good knowledge of phonetics to understand how sounds work. And last but definitely not least, phonetics and phonology plays a crucial part in speech and language therapy, especially delivering effective speech and language therapy. And this is a really popular career destination for our students. Okay, that's everything. Thanks for listening.